Floyd Mayweather Jr., 10F17453X.
In June 2012, Mayweather began serving his 90-day jail sentence.
To suggest that somehow that we should have second-guessed that punishment, I don't think that that's the role that the Nevada State Athletic Commission should be in.
Pat Lundvall serves on the 5-member Nevada State Athletic Commission. It was Lundvall and her fellow commissioners who voted unanimously to issue Mayweather a boxing license before he served his sentence.
Do I think that domestic violence is a very serious issue? Absolutely. Mr. Mayweather was punished by the criminal justice system. He served his punishment. He paid his debt to society.
But the commission has in the past suspended fighters for far less. And its own guidelines say it can suspend the license of any fighter who has violated the laws of Nevada, except for minor traffic violations.
You can suspend licenses for somebody who's arrested for anything north of a traffic violation. And you didn't do anything when a guy assaulted the mother of his children in front of his kids.
I disagree with your characterization strongly. The criminal justice system had decided what this man's punishment was. A judge had made that decision, and we paid respect to that decision.
The optics, it just doesn't look good, does it?
Well, the optics are your business. The optics are not my business.
Floyd Mayweather Jr. is undoubtedly the best ever. And from a Christian perspective, and just like in the story of Joseph, he had brothers who envied him and was jealous of him and hated him, meant him no good, wanted to kill him, threw him in a ditch, sold him into slavery. To my European Christian brothers, every single Christian underneath the sound of my voice, but mainly and specifically my European brothers. Whether you want to call them right-wing Christians, evangelical Christians, Protestant Christians, ecumenical movement Christians, you name it. Once again, you are repeating that same history. Floyd Money Mayweather Jr. has survived some of the most horrific domestic violence and abuse on the face of the planet at the hands of so-called Christians.
Now, I am grateful, very grateful, that we are having a national debate about gun control, and for the moment, at least, politicians and the media are paying attention to the deaths of black and brown school children, not just white children killed by deranged mass murderers. But I am deeply disturbed that in this national debate about violence and gun control, there is little honest discussion of why, truly why, some communities are war zones while others are not. For while I support gun control and background checks and all the rest, let me be very clear about that, I think we have got to admit that the reason that some communities are war zones and some are not is not at bottom about the number of guns in those communities. After all, I live in a community where I've come to learn that many of my white neighbors own guns. But my neighborhood is safe. At bottom, what makes a community safe is not the number of guns, but the number of good schools, the number of good jobs, the number of educational opportunities, the numbers of opportunities people have for living a decent life. Those are the numbers that matter most when it comes to violence. And in Chicago, as in so many other cities and communities across America, a choice has been made. It is a deliberate choice, and it is a choice that has been made over and over and over again. Rather than good schools, we have been willing to build high-tech prisons. Rather than create jobs and invest in the communities that need it most, we have embarked on an unprecedented race to incarcerate that has left millions of Americans permanently locked up or locked out. William Julius Wilson has written an excellent book about the changes that have occurred in Chicago and other communities around the country entitled "When Work Disappears." And in that book, he cites statistics showing that when you control for joblessness, the racial disparities and violent crime disappear. In other words, if you compare white jobless men with black jobless men, rates of violent crime are roughly the same. Men who are jobless, particularly chronically jobless, are more likely to be violent. Now, joblessness does not excuse violence by any means. Most people who are jobless do not resort to violence. But what we know, and what is no secret, is that communities that are plagued by exceedingly high levels of joblessness are likely to be violent. But a shift occurred here in Chicago and in communities across America, urban communities, beginning in the late 50s, early 60s, into the 1970s, where work disappeared. It used to be that factories would be located in urban areas near segregated black communities so those factories could have quick and easy access to cheap black labor. In fact, as late as 1970, more than 70% of all African Americans working in the Chicago area held blue-collar jobs, factory jobs. Almost overnight, those jobs vanished. By 1987, the industrial employment of black men had plummeted to 28%. Due to deindustrialization, globalization, technological advancement, factories closing down, jobs moving overseas, hundreds of thousands of people, overwhelmingly black men, found themselves suddenly jobless, trapped in racially segregated, jobless communities. Trapped. Economic collapse occurred in urban areas across the country. Now, we could have responded to this crisis, to this literal depression occurring in cities like Chicago and Baltimore and Philadelphia and Detroit and beyond. We could have responded to this crisis, this economic collapse, this literal depression, with an outpouring of care, compassion, and concern. We could have responded with bailout packages, economic stimulus programs. We could have provided job training, particularly to young people coming up in these communities, so they could make the rough transition from an industrial economy to a service-based economy. But no, we chose a different road, a road more familiar when it comes to matters of race. We chose the road of division, punitiveness, and despair. We as a society ended the war on poverty and declared the war on drugs. Black men found themselves suddenly disposable, no longer necessary to the functioning of the U.S. economy. And so this war on drugs was declared, and black men found that they were no longer needed to work in the fields, no longer needed to labor in factories, and they found themselves scapegoats, pawns in political games, the enemy in a new war, and were rounded up by the millions, locked up, and then permanently locked out. Decades later, we stand back and say, what's wrong with these people? Why are they killing each other? Why is there so much violence in these communities that we have abandoned? Communities where good schools cannot be found, but high-tech prisons are a drive away. What's wrong with them? I think the deeper question, the more profound question, is what is wrong with us? Why have we been silent for so long? Well, I've been asked to share with you the thesis of my book, The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, and I think the title of the book pretty much speaks for itself. I argue that today, in the so-called era of colorblindness, and yes, even in the age of Obama, and even right here in Obama's hometown, something akin to a caste system is alive and well in America. The mass incarceration of poor people of color in the United States is tantamount to a new caste system, one that shuttles our children from decrepit, underfunded schools to these brand new high-tech prisons. It is a system that locks poor people, overwhelmingly poor folks of color, into a permanent second-class status, nearly as effectively as earlier systems of racial and social control once did. In my view, this new system is the moral equivalent of Jim Crow.